is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: China, the United States, the UK and France are to evacuate their nationals from Sudan as fighting enters a second week. Our other headlines: thousands of civilians in the Russian city of Belgorod, which borders Ukraine, are being moved from their homes after the discovery of explosives. America and abortion. The US Supreme Court rules to protect access to a widely used abortion pill, while legal wrangling over its use continues. China's foreign minister in the Philippines, as Beijing and Manila agree to work towards the peaceful resolution of maritime disputes. And huge swathes of Asia are suffering what some climate experts are calling the worst April heatwave in the region's history. Citizens of China, the United States, the United Kingdom and France are to be evacuated from Sudan as violence there enters a second week. Gunfire and explosions have continued in the capital Khartoum despite efforts to hold a ceasefire during the Muslim Eid celebrations. Hundreds of people have died across the country in the last 7 days amid clashes between Sudan's armed forces and a rival paramilitary group. The Sudanese army says it's coordinating efforts to evacuate foreign nationals despite fighting around Khartoum's airport. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Patrick Oyet in Juba, the capital of South Sudan. Patrick, in the last hour, we're hearing that Sudan's army leader has called for the warring factions to sit down and find a way out of this. Any response from his opponents, do we know?
We have not yet had a direct response to that call from the Rapid Support Forces. However, for the first time since the violence broke out a week ago, the second in command of the Rapid Support Forces has been speaking, but he has been speaking generally about the clashes and, of course, saying that they are fighting so that they return the country back to civilian rule. So he did not yet respond to that call, but definitely that's a call that many people would wish that they respond to positively, because at the end of the day, in this kind of clashes, there is no winner. Even if you push a group out of Khartoum, they are likely to go to the bushes and the desert of Sudan and wage a civil war. So the better a negotiated settlement is done is better for everybody. And also I can tell you that in South Sudan, where I am, a number of people have returned. These people were caught up in Khartoum. Some of them managed to escape. They drove to the northern part of South Sudan, and today the government of South Sudan sent 2 planes, and they have just arrived in Juba. Yeah, so people are concerned about the crisis, and the sooner a negotiated settlement is reached, it would be better for everybody.
I mean, clearly the international community isn't terribly optimistic about peace breaking out anytime soon. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this call for evacuating foreign nationals. What's the latest on that operation?
Yeah, that's a very difficult operation to evacuate foreign nationals because, of course, fighting is ongoing within Khartoum, and the airport, the Khartoum International Airport, is just in the middle of the city, and this is where the fighting is taking place. So definitely landing there is not yet possible. That's why, for example, the diplomats from Saudi Arabia and their families had to drive to Port Sudan to go and be evacuated from that side. And the concern for many Sudanese that we are speaking to also is that if the foreign nationals who are in the country are going to be evacuated, then they don't see an end to the current crisis, because they say that it's like they are being abandoned. Their friends are leaving them. They would want to see the foreign nationals remain and put pressure on the rivaling groups so that at least some negotiated settlement could be reached.
Patrick, thank you for that. Our correspondent Patrick Oyet in Juba, the capital of South Sudan. Around 3,000 people are being evacuated from the Russian border city of Belgorod after an explosive device was found. This all comes 2 days after a Russian warplane accidentally dropped a bomb on the Russian city, which is 40 kilometers from the Ukraine border. Our correspondent Shelby Wilder is in Kyiv.
Let's start with Thursday night when Russia accidentally bombed one of its own cities, that is Belgorod. As you mentioned, it's located near the Ukrainian border. Reports said that a Russian warplane accidentally fired one of its own weapons on the city, which caused a huge explosion. It injured 3 civilians, damaged some buildings, and also left behind huge craters there. But the developing news we have been following today is coming from the governor of Belgorod, who said that explosive objects have been found near that same site where that explosion took place on Thursday evening, Jamie.
Has there been any confirmation of this from Moscow?
So what Russia has been saying so far is that they will be evacuating 17 large apartment blocks there. That means that over 3,000 people will be removed from the area for their safety while officials can try and learn more and get a hold of this situation. Otherwise, to give you comments from Ukraine in regards to the accidental strike by Russia on its own city, we heard Alexei Danilov, the Secretary of National Security and Defense, say that this situation was, quote, meant to intimidate civilians and escalate the situation, end quote. That's the Ukrainians commenting. But as for the matter in Belgorod, it is a developing story, so we will see how it unfolds in the coming hours, Jamie.
The United States Supreme Court has ruled to protect access to a widely used abortion pill while legal wrangling over its use continues. The fight over mifepristone could have the most significant impact on abortion access in the United States since last year's overturning of a law which had upheld the constitutional right to abortion. This latest controversy began 2 weeks ago when a Texas judge suspended the Food and Drug Administration's long-standing approval of the drug. Challenges by the Department of Justice and the drug's manufacturer sent the case to an appeal court. It temporarily blocked the Texas decision, but placed a host of restrictions on mifepristone's use. That led President Joe Biden to last week ask the Supreme Court to intervene. While it's reinstated access to mifepristone for now, the legal battle is far from over. Our correspondent Tony Waterman reports now from Texas.
This is a major win for the FDA, the Biden administration, and abortion rights groups, which had warned of mass confusion and legal chaos if restrictions from the lower courts were left standing. Instead, the justices maintained the status quo. So the FDA's approval of mifepristone, which a conservative judge here in Texas had tried to revoke, remains in place. And the drug will still be available via mail and up to 10 weeks, something that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had tried to roll back. This will be the status quo as this case makes its way through the courts, all the way up to the Supreme Court, if it goes that far. So we're talking about a fair amount of time. Now, the court's order was brief, it was unsigned, and it did not explain why it granted the request by the Biden administration to intervene. 2 judges publicly dissented. Those were Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, who wrote a short dissent that narrowly focused on whether the Supreme Court could intervene in the lower courts. And he pointed out that justices that joined the stay had been critical of intervening in the past. Now, in terms of what comes next, the case goes back to the Fifth Circuit, which has already fast-tracked the case. Oral arguments are scheduled for May 17th, and the first briefings could be in as early as next week. This ruling from the Supreme Court, though, does send a signal to the lower courts on how it thinks about the issue, especially around FDA approval. If the scientific authority of the FDA were to be reversed by a judge, as the one here in Texas was trying to do, it could upend the entire drug approval process in the United States and open other approved medications to political challenges. So think about the morning after pill, contraceptives, gender-affirming drugs, anything really. And that could jeopardize the health of Americans. Now, President Joe Biden said in a statement that the stakes couldn't be higher for women and that he will continue to fight politically driven attacks on women's health. But for now, mifepristone, which is used in more than half of all abortions in the U.S., will remain available, at least in the states that haven't banned the medication. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
Explorers have found the wreck of a World War II ship at the heart of Australia's worst maritime disaster. The Montevideo Maru was a Japanese ship torpedoed by US forces off the Philippines. But unknown to the Americans, on board were over 1,000 Australian civilians and prisoners of war, all of whom drowned. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said he hoped the discovery would provide a measure of comfort to the relatives. The former UK Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has accused what he calls activist civil servants of trying to block reforms they didn't like. This comes after he resigned over bullying complaints. Speaking to the BBC, Raab said the only complaints that had been upheld came from a handful of very senior officials. The former top civil servant denied those claims, saying staff had worked very hard for him. Dozens of top companies in the UK, including Sainsbury's, Tesco, Aviva and John Lewis, have severed ties with the country's biggest business lobbying group, the Confederation for British Industry, the CBI. The companies have withdrawn amid investigations into sexual misconduct by senior staff, including claims of rape. The CBI has suspended all its activity until a general meeting in June. New Zealanders living in Australia will be able to gain fast-track citizenship following a reversal of controversial changes made over 20 years ago. Those who've lived in Australia on so-called special category visas for 4 years can now apply for citizenship without first becoming permanent residents. They'll retain their dual nationality. And Australians are to vote on constitutional recognition for Aboriginal people and other Indigenous groups. The legislation includes the setting up of an Indigenous Government Advisory Group to assist with policy making. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
This moment has been a very long time in the making.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was visibly emotional as he announced details of a process designed to give the country's Indigenous people a voice in Parliament.
To not put this to a vote to not put this to a vote is to concede defeat.
The vote facing Australians later this year will come in the form of a question whether they support changing the Constitution to create an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, a consultative committee providing advice to Parliament on matters that affect them.
Despite being the oldest continuous culture on the planet, Indigenous Australians currently do not have any constitutional protections. In the 1960s, Australia's constitution was amended to include Indigenous people in the country's census.
We don't have anything that gives us the opportunity to speak directly to the governance of Australia about matters that are of direct importance to us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we can't, for example, easily influence environmental laws, heritage laws.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people make up less than 4% of the country's population and are Australia's most disadvantaged ethnic group. Previous governments have tried to close the gap, but Indigenous people still die younger than non-Indigenous Australians and are more likely to be unemployed and imprisoned.
Recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution will be a simple but powerful act. It will move Australia forward for everyone.
While polls show the majority of Australians support the voice to Parliament, the country's opposition party does not.
It should be very clear to Australians by now that the Prime Minister is dividing our country and the Liberal Party seeks to unite our country.
And there is a sizable minority, including some First Nations people, who argue the plan isn't enough.
We don't want to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this, which could have been better spent on getting kids to school, starting up businesses and getting them to happen.
I think that any cost associated with setting up that representative group will be more than offset by having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being able to decide how other monies are spent.
The referendum needs the support of the majority of Australians in the majority of states to pass. It's scheduled to go before voters toward the end of the year. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, huge swathes of Asia are suffering from what some climate experts are calling the worst April heatwave in the region's history.
this week on Razor, trying out the Formula One racing simulator.
Putting in the inputs in the same way, through the same components, and then it's responding with actual motions.
And the worms that can degrade plastic.
So if we manage to arrive at the point in which you can apply liters of this solution of enzymes to piles of plastic, maybe there will be the way to tackle plastic waste management.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. China, the United States, the UK and France are to evacuate their nationals from Sudan as fighting enters a second week. Our other headlines: thousands of civilians in the Russian city of Belgorod, which borders Ukraine, are being moved from their homes after the discovery of explosives. And the US Supreme Court rules to protect access to a widely used abortion pill while legal wrangling over its use continues. China and the Philippines have said they'll work together towards resolving maritime disputes. This comes during a visit to Manila by China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang. Our correspondent Gretchen Malalad reports.
We are very happy.
The Chinese delegation, headed by State Councilor and Foreign Minister Qin Gang, was warmly welcomed by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at the Malacañang Palace Saturday. Foreign Minister Qin is in Manila for his first official visit since he was appointed last December. He is the first highest-ranking Chinese diplomat to visit the country this year. Foreign Minister Qin held bilateral talks with his counterpart, Philippine Foreign Minister Enrique Manalo. They talked about increasing and strengthening cooperation in the fields of agriculture, trade, infrastructure, and people-to-people relations.
Together, let us endeavor to elevate our bilateral relations to even greater heights under the administration of President Marcos, who shared the commitment with President Xi to do everything possible to ensure that Philippine-China relations will continue the positive trajectory of our relations, which was elevated to a comprehensive strategic cooperation since 2018.
Foreign Minister Qin's visit coincides with the Philippines and the United States holding their largest military exercises, with nearly 18,000 soldiers participating in live-fire exercises and combat drills. 4 new military sites under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation, or EDCA, which will be used by U.S. troops, will be built across the country. China has raised its concerns over the rising U.S. military presence in the Philippines. Geopolitical analyst Lucio Pitlo III from the Asia-Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation believes the visit is timely and significant, that it will help tone down the tensions in the region.
It's an opportunity for Manila and Beijing to have a conversation about the state of bilateral relations, and maybe for Manila to also perhaps allay the concerns, maybe suit the concerns of Beijing, and of course to convey, the interest of Manila to continue expanding relations with Beijing, especially on the economic front.
Foreign Minister Qin says amid the fluid and turbulent regional situation, China aims to build a healthy and stable relationship with the Philippines.
We must work together to continue our tradition of friendship, deepen mutually beneficial cooperation, and properly resolve our differences in the spirit of credibility, consultation and dialogue. We must keep our promises so as to bring more benefits to our two countries and peoples. We should inject greater positive energy to the peace and stability of this region and the whole world.
Both ministers agreed that the territorial disputes is not the sum total of relationship between China and the Philippines. Foreign Minister Qin will leave the country Sunday morning. Gretchen Malalad, CGTN, Manila.
It's United Nations Earth Day, with events taking place all around the world to raise awareness of environmental issues. Thousands of people have taken to the streets of London for a second day, demanding an end to the use of fossil fuels. The 4-day action, called the Big One, is supported by more than 200 organisations. Protest organisers Extinction Rebellion have already pledged to suspend disruptive tactics, but a warning of more protests to come. Meanwhile, protesters in France are demonstrating against the construction of a new highway linking the cities of Castres and Toulouse. They say the 53-kilometre motorway is unnecessary and will destroy 2,500 trees and surrounding natural habitats. Supporters of the plan say it's crucial for economic development. Well, huge swathes of Asia are suffering what some climate experts are calling the worst April heatwave in Asian history. Record-breaking temperatures have been seen in China, Myanmar, Laos and Thailand, where the heat index, which records what the temperature actually feels like, hit 54 degrees Celsius. Officials have issued a heat alert and are warning people to avoid outdoor activities. India is particularly vulnerable to heat extremes. Its workforce is made up of a large proportion of rural and outdoor labourers, and there are fears over their safety and the impact on the country's economy. Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer reports.
As many states in India grapple with heat wave, Monica, a farm worker, is compelled to be out in extreme weather conditions. She toils under the scorching sun to ensure that her family has food at the end of the day.
If we don't work, we won't have enough to eat. The sun is strong and hot. We take frequent water breaks to continue working under this heat.
Like Monica, more than half of India works in the unorganized sector, exposed to outdoor jobs like construction and farming. The International Labour Organization has warned that India is expected to lose about 6% of working hours by 2030 due to frequent heat waves.
A country like India, where most of our work are in the exposed environment and we are still coming up, and construction work and infrastructure development is still happening, so India is going to be definitely severely affected by heat waves.
According to the Climate Transparency Report published by environmental groups last year, falling productivity caused by extreme high temperatures could already be costing India 5.4% of its GDP. Ram Naresh, a mason, says the summer is the least efficient season of the year.
This heat affects our productivity. The work which we could finish in 10 days gets delayed by 15 days as heat slows down our output. We face many difficulties delivering the project on time.
Unusually hot weather conditions are expected to continue till the end of June, as India is expecting a less intense monsoon season this year. Indians aren't likely to get relief from the hot weather anytime soon. But many feel it's high time that the government stepped in to help and implement both short-term measures like advisories and long-term measures like afforestation urgently. Ravinder Bauer, CGTN, Delhi.
Biomedicine, sustainable transport, green energy, key areas in which China and the EU should broaden collaboration, according to businesses on both sides. Talks have been taking place in Barcelona on boosting cooperation on science and innovation. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
She has been called the most influential Chinese person living in Spain by Spanish national newspaper El País. Margaret Chen has dedicated a large part of her life here to building Sino-Spanish business relationships, with a particular focus on renewable energy. Her efforts recognized this week at a special ceremony that took place in Barcelona. She has also used her contacts and experience to help Spanish companies break into the Chinese market. Bilateral relations between the two countries are very strong. The Spanish government has recently signed collaboration agreements to help increase exports from its agri-food sector to the lucrative Chinese market. Spain will also take over the EU rotating presidency in July.
China, Spain, China, Europe, we need each other because China is a big market and it is still growing and there are lots of needs. So Europe is an old continent, but Europe is good for inventing things. Europe is good for management and experience of doing the things in the right way. For example, the branding, So there are lots of things that China can learn from Europe. And Europe also needs the market from China to develop their own market.
China is the EU's biggest trading partner. That's worth over $2.5 billion per day. The EU and China now account for around half of the world's total GDP, and the European Union is hoping to increase its exports to China, a country that offers the largest middle-class market in the world. Whilst in Barcelona, Margaret Chen also helped chair a roundtable discussion on how China and the EU can collaborate more closely through science and innovation. One project already underway is ITER. It's the world's largest nuclear fusion collaboration with a long-term aim to create a limitless source of carbon-free energy, using the same principles as the sun.
ITER, which is this massive infrastructure on nuclear fusion that is based in southern France, is an international partnership of over 35 countries that includes the EU, China, Russia, among many others. And it's an amazing example of science diplomacy.
Producing self-sustaining nuclear fusion may still be years away, but bringing together the brightest scientific minds from around the world is an example of how international collaboration could achieve real progress for the greater good. Ken Brown, CGTN, Barcelona.
Artificial intelligence has been dominating the tech headlines, writing school homework, composing chart-topping songs, and even fooling the judges at a photography competition. All stories that have made the news headlines in recent months. But AI is also set to play an increasingly important role in the future of manufacturing. Our correspondent Peter Oliver reports.
Meet Yumi, the robot that is charged with showing off the latest AI offering from US tech giant Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. The program, created by HPE partners Alpha, is designed to work alongside humans, not replace them.
So what we're doing is we're moving the manpower from one part of the equation to another. So, yeah, I don't see it as getting rid of it. In many ways, it's creating jobs, just in a different place.
With a lot of money at stake and manufacturers potentially open to cyber attacks when using artificial intelligence, those in the cybersecurity business are having to develop their own.
So that's why we use artificial intelligence in order to secure artificial intelligence in the automation industry. So it learned by itself. So it develops like every artificial intelligence. So it keeps pace with the industry because it's behavioral based. So it's not looking at some bad code, it's looking at the behavior of bad software.
Suzhou-based robotics company Hito makes equipment used in car manufacturing. Their products feature on assembly lines for German car giants VW and BMW in China. Their production facility uses AI tech, but their CEO says it's not a perfect system yet.
The data model of adding hardware and software to the network has become a new business format, so that more technology companies can cooperate with traditional manufacturing companies and innovative companies. Only when talents can be integrated into a new format can the entire AI use scenario be optimized to a greater extent.
Undoubtedly, using AI for manufacturing is the way forward. But if it's fully autonomous, thinking robots taking human manufacturing jobs that you're worried about, we may have a few years to go. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Hanover.
Tributes have been paid to the Australian comedian Barry Humphries, who's died at the age of 89. Best known as the creator of the iconic character Dame Edna Everage, he appeared on stage and television for over 60 years after moving to the UK in 1959. He was also a talented author and poet. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. More news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.